Good morning, everyone. Oh, I love it, audience participation. I love the energy. So as Nick mentioned, I look after employee experience at Edelman. We help companies with culture, communications, and change. I'm also an executive coach. But something that is not on my LinkedIn profile is that I love science fiction. Star Trek, Star Wars, anything with time travel, alternate realities, count me in. I basically have just outed myself as the nerdiest person in this room. One of my favorite all-time movies is Contact, which you might remember came out in the late 90s. It was all about the search for extraterrestrial life. Jodie Foster plays a scientist who is driven by the empirical evidence and the search for proof. Matthew McConaughey is essentially the opposite. He is a man of faith. And there's a scene early on in that movie where Matthew McConaughey asks Jodie Foster, did you love your father? And she says, of course, very much. And then he responds, prove it. Prove that you loved your father. Now, of course, she couldn't, because love is tangible, it's very powerful, but it's not something that you can necessarily prove. Trust is much the same way. And we at Edelman have actually been spending the last almost 20 years measuring, tracking, and actually quantifying trust in business. We've learned that trust in business really drives our buying behavior, who we choose to buy products and services from, who we recommend as a place to work, and frankly, who we choose to go to work for. So today I'm here to talk to you about the results from this year's 2019 Edelman Trust Barometer survey. So moving right into that. As I mentioned, we are very excited and fanatical about trust and have been studying it for 19 years now. And over those almost 2 decades, we've noticed really two sort of broad trends, macro, across the years. So starting in 2005, 2006, we noticed that there was this shift from traditional authority figures, people like CEOs and the media, government leaders. And this really coincided with the rise of social media. And around that time, a person like me became the most credible and trusted source of information. Then, several years later and more recently, what we've seen is that peer-to-peer exchange and that trust in a person like me has actually eroded. And that is due largely, we think, to the dawning realization that social media platforms can actually be used for harm. Concerns over how is my data being protected, kept private, and potentially used. So at the backdrop of these two very different changes of shifting trust, something new has emerged this year for the first time, which is that trust has now gone local. People now trust the people that they see every day and feel closest to. And those relationships include the one that people have with their employer, which leads us to the theme for this year's Trust Barometer, which is trust at work. I'm going to get to that in just a second. I will also say, too, I'm flying through these slides pretty quickly because I have a lovely person here who's keeping me on track. I have 20 minutes, so all of these slides, do not expect you to be able to see and read everything on there. They are all available on our website, trust.edelman.com. If you have questions afterwards, grab me. I'll be around for at least a couple hours, so would love to talk more. Anyway, so talking first about a couple key themes from the research overall. So in terms of background, we have fielded the study in October and November of last year. It was an online study. We spoke to a lot of people, over 33,000 respondents in 27 markets around the world. So this is truly a global look at trust. And some really interesting and perhaps concerning findings really arose this year. First of all, kind of good news, sort of modestly, is that we saw a modest rise in trust. There are 4 institutions here that we have tracked since the early 2000s when we began the study, which are NGOs, non-governmental organizations, business, media, and governments. And this year we noticed a slight uptick across the board, but in general, we noticed kind of for the first time ever that NGOs have officially lost their edge over business. They're both now tied at 56% in level of trust. Government and media still extremely distrusted, driven by everything we're seeing in our own administration and those around the world, and of course, fake news. The other thing, though, I think that's important to note is that there's a top and a bottom to this slide, right? The top section is what we call informed publics. So that is 15% of those 33,000 folks that we spoke with, and we define those as college-educated, top quartile for income, and regularly consume news about business and public policy. The remaining 85% is the general population. So that's relevant because we noticed this year an extreme inequality of trust. And that's a fancy way of saying that the folks that are, if you would consider sort of the elites, the class versus the mass, far more trusting than the general population. A 16-point gap across for all of the institutions, returning us to the all-time previous high that we saw 2 years ago. So this is interesting because it is not just an income or an education thing. We also saw a huge divide between men and women and the degree to which they trust business. Women, 15 percentage points lower in trust in business than men. Why? You can probably guess. Things like Me Too, lack of CEOs, women CEOs, lack of pay inequality, all of these things playing into that. But the other thing, too, when we think about the mass versus class, why do folks kind of at the general population have such deep distrust in business and other institutions? One word, fear. People are afraid. They're afraid of losing their jobs to automation. They're afraid of, when that happens, not having the skills or the training or the experience necessary to get another job. They are afraid of their companies no longer being able to compete in a global economy because of international trade policies, tariffs, and other disputes. Also, this is even more acutely felt by folks that work in multinational corporations and organizations. Not only are those folks feeling all of the same fears that the rest of the world is fearing, they have also been subjected to organizational restructurings and other changes that may not have positively affected them. And then really, when I talk about this fear, it kind of culminates into this general feeling of downward mobility. And 1 in 5 people essentially said, the system is working for me, meaning there's a large percentage of people that feel, actually, the system's failing me, and in 5 years from now, I do not expect to be better off. I do think, so that is clearly an alarming and perhaps not uplifting sort of statistic there, but I will point out, though, that there is a sizable movable middle, roughly 35%, and those are the folks that aren't sure. They're uncertain and therefore potentially persuadable if we can give them reasons to trust business and to help them see that there is a path and a more positive future. That being said, I think really what all of that speaks to is a strong sense of injustice and an even stronger desire for change. And we've really seen over the past year people taking change into their own hands to affect the changes they wish to see inside their workplace and out in the world. Take, for example, what we saw in France with the Yellow Vest movement protesting social inequality and income inequality. Think about what happened in India. Women lining up to form nearly 400 miles of a human chain to protest the lack of women's rights. Internally, within organizations, Amazon protesting working conditions, even going so far as to buy stock in the company so they could go to the shareholder meeting and protest verbally. And of course, Salesforce, who protested their organization's work with the US Border Agency. Ultimately, under the backdrop of all of this sort of upheaval and activism and change, really, quite frankly, the most shocking thing that we saw out of this year's Barometer is the fact that in a time where no institution is trusted, perhaps even weirdly, my employer emerged as a bright spot. 3 out of 4 people in all of the groups we talked to said, I trust my own company to do what is right. So you might wonder, well, why is that, given everything you just told me about sort of the state of trust? I think 2 things, really. The first being, we trust the people that we know and we can see, right? So this idea of trust going local, people are turning to the relationships that they feel closest to. Those are your coworkers. Those are the people that you see on the shop floor, in the office, management of the company. There is this sense that I can influence the people making the decisions, but I have to know those people and know who's making the decisions. So there's a sense of I do have the ability to persuade and have a say in decisions. The second piece being is that people choose to work at a given company or a given organization. So there's a sense of I have leverage over this relationship. And during a time of historically low unemployment, they have a lot of choices and they can choose to leave. All right, so with this extremely high, unprecedentedly high trust in leadership, in the company, it also comes with a price, frankly. Employees are looking for leadership from their CEOs and from their employers. 76% of folks said, I expect, not I would like to see, but I expect my CEO to speak up and actively lead change on issues like equal pay, discrimination, fake news, sexual harassment. How are we actually protecting people's data? How are we helping to reduce our impact on the economy? What are we doing to help train people for the jobs of tomorrow? 11-point jump over last year. This is not an option in people's minds. They actively expect this. So interestingly enough, as I was saying, there's a certain expectation for action, right? You think about what PayPal did, Don Schulman extending a $25 million investment in no-interest bridge loans for folks affected by the government shutdown, just to be able to make ends meet. Good example of actually taking action. But words matter too. And we asked people, what are the topics that, if your company were to talk to you about more regularly, would increase your trust in your employer? And these are the 5 that came to the top, and these are in order. So the first thing is societal impact. What is my organization doing to help society become a better place? Values. What are the core beliefs that actually underpin our culture and our everyday behaviors? Where are we going? What is our vision for the future of work, the future of our business, the future of the world? Purpose. What are we doing? What are we really committed to beyond making money? And then finally, and only finally in last place, are operations, decisions that affect my job. Now this is interesting because I think it maybe sort of contradicts our assumption that people are inherently self-interested, and they ultimately want to know what's in it for me. What's the consequence for me? And yes, people told us that is true. They expect that. But really, I think, came as a surprise is that they actually care about the impact of a company's decisions on the world around them and things that are going to affect not just them, but their children and their grandchildren and the generations to come. This is not, I should mention, not just a millennial thing. We saw this across all of the segments, the ages, and different groups that we surveyed. So this is truly an opportunity to regain trust by talking about things that maybe perhaps aren't on your agenda internally already. We also noticed that folks now have new expectations of their employer that go beyond perhaps what you might have expected previously. So we asked people to rate a series of characteristics of a potential employer. And to give this question some serious real-world weight, one of the ways we wanted to respond was to say, if these conditions are not present in an employer, I will either A, flat out refuse to work there, or B, you're going to have to pay me a lot more to work there. And so we saw 3 specific expectations that people have of future employers. Now the first one, down at the bottom, job opportunity, 80% saying, I expect my company to be able to help me grow my income, help me do work that is interesting, grow my career skills, feel fulfillment. That's table stakes. I think we don't need a survey to tell us that, right? But what is interesting is if you go up to personal empowerment, not just right behind that, 74% said it is almost as important for me to know what is going on at my organization. And I expect to have a say in the strategic planning process and decisions that the company makes. And then thirdly, 2 out of 3 people saying this whole idea of I expect there to be shared action, basically that my company has a greater purpose beyond making money, and I have an opportunity as an employee to contribute to that and make an impact. So I think among many of you in this organization, I don't think I have to do much convincing of you that it's important to have your employees' trust. But whenever people ask, why should I care? Here's the reality. If employees trust their employer, it changes their behavior. There's 4 specific behaviors that we see that employees are much more likely to do if they trust the company they work for. Advocacy, willing to talk about their company and defend it in times of crisis on social media, in their live conversations, recommend their company as a great place to work. Loyalty, pretty simply put, I will stay with my company for a long time. And if any of you are having trouble finding the talent you need right now for your organization, given we have a full employment market, you know just how important this is. Engagement. I'm simply more willing to do more than just the bare minimum that is expected of me. I will offer suggestions and ideas about how we can make our business better. And then finally, commitment. I will do my best for our customers and for our business. Another reason why employee trust is so important. We asked people who are the most credible sources of information about a company? Who do you trust when they talk about a company? Number 1 most credible source is a company technical expert. Engineers, scientists, the people behind your products. Look where the CEO is. That is a 18-point difference. And even a regular employee is considered to be far more credible than the CEO of a company. So bottom line, when employees talk about their company, the world listens and the world believes them. All right, bottom line, have to talk about what is the impact of trust on the bottom line. People told us, almost 8 in 10 said that how a company treats its own employees is one of the strongest and best indicators of the company's overall trustworthiness. And so that's the positive. On the flip side, about 2 out of 3 folks said, you know what, you might be able to get me to try a product if based on the strength of a company's reputation. But if I do not come to trust the people behind that product, you will not have my business going forward. So truly, there is a bottom line impact for trust, and it can pay dividends. All right, so that was a lot of data that I just threw at you, and you might say, all right, great, lots of insights. Now, what do I do with all of this? All right, so if we had more time, we could dig much more deeply into this. But really, this year, Trust Barometer points to a new employee-employer contract, if you will, and 4 key sort of mandates that employers can take to start really making sure that they have employees' trust. Number 1, lead change. Be aspirational. Set a moonshot. Talk about what is our company's purpose? What are we actually doing and here to invest in? And make sure you actually know what your company's purpose is. And frankly, please don't let it be creating shareholder value. I don't know about you. I do not get out of bed in the morning to create shareholder value. Number 2, empower employees. Give them a voice. This is different. I assume a lot of you work in organizations where you have a town hall and you have Q&A, and oftentimes it will be a situation where you announce a decision that you've made as a company and then say any questions, right? This is not what people expect. They actually expect to have a say on the front end and be able to input into strategic planning and those kinds of decisions. A lot of words you'll hear, bottoms-up strategic planning, but giving people an opportunity to actually solve business challenges. Say, this is something that's facing our industry. Help us figure it out. I think also one of the things that I learned when I was training to be an executive coach is the art of the open-ended question, which is so underused, I feel like, in corporate America. Train your leaders to actually invite dissent and dialogue. That is different than saying at the end of a presentation, any questions? Takes a brave soul to raise their hand. How about instead saying, what am I missing here? Who else sees this differently? What if the opposite is true of what I am saying? Openly invite that dialogue, dissent, and then listen. Number 3, Start locally. Solve problems at home, in your communities that you operate, in your hometown, in your headquarters. Think about Microsoft, $500 million investment in affordable housing in Seattle. And then finally, activate your CEO in terms of taking leadership on really the issues that affect your company, your industry, and your employees, and do it in a way that really, truly reflects your values and reinforces the behaviors and the core beliefs that your company holds so true. Thank you.